Well, welcome back to this GIMP scripting tutorial series. If you haven't watched the first part of this series yet, you should definitely check that out first before proceeding with this video. If you have watched the first video already, then you know our end goal for this series is to create a script which generates random splatter brushes in GIMP. And if you remember back to my original tutorial a long time ago on how to make your own splatter brushes in GIMP, then the process went something like we painted around with the sparks brush on an empty canvas and turned it black. And the last few steps then were to go to colors threshold, which turned our image purely black and white like this. But the problem with that was that the edges were too pixelated. So we went to filters blur, Gaussian blur. We blurred this by a few pixels. That was too blurry though, so to get a nice happy medium, we went to colors, levels, and we adjusted these two slider values to something like this. And as we did that, that gave us these nice smooth edges for our brush that weren't too pixelated but also weren't blurry. So our goal for today's video is to write a script which applies the threshold tool and then smooths out the edges, as you can see here. So before we actually begin writing the script for today's video, we're going to go back to our script.foo console, which remember is in filters, script.foo console. And we're going to cover one last topic that I forgot to mention in the first video. So in the previous video we talked about how to define your own variables, and we also talked about how to use functions in script.foo. In today's video we're going to need to know how to combine those two ideas and define our own functions. So how can we do that? Well, we can use the same define function that we used to create new variables in the previous video, but instead of defining a variable we're going to define a function. And the format for that, the syntax to define a function, is we're going to include another opening parentheses, and the next part is going to be the name of whatever we want our function to be. So for this example, I'm going to create a new function which you input a number to it, and it will return the double of that number to you, so 2 times whatever the number you inputted. So I can call this function, say, double, and I need to pass one parameter to this function that will represent the number that the user is inputting, the number that you want to be doubled. So I can just use the variable x to represent whatever that number is. Then we close off the parentheses. So this is just the name of our function and a list of whatever arguments we need to input to the function. So after this we're going to include another space, and then we're going to put whatever commands we want the function to actually do whenever we call it. So for this example, we just want it to take whatever x was and multiply that number by 2. So I just use the times operator, the asterisk, and put x2. That will multiply, remember this command from the previous video, this returns the value of x times 2. And then we can close off our function definition. So this defines a new function called double, which takes one argument, x, and it returns that number times 2. So now if I go ahead and click enter, that will go ahead and create my function called double. And now I can use this just like any other function that we used in the previous video. I can say double, say 7, and that will return that number 7 times 2. Or I could say double negative 13.2, and we'll get double that. So if you still have your script.foo console open, you can go ahead and close that. We are actually done with that now. To actually write our scripts, all you really need is a simple text editor program, such as the Notepad program that comes bundled with Windows. So what we're going to start off by doing is creating a new function, defining a function just like we previously did in the script.foo console. So again, we're going to use this syntax define, and the name of our function is going to be whatever we want the name of our script to be. So the convention is usually to start off the name of your script with the phrase script.foo. The purpose of this script, as I said, is going to be to apply the threshold tool to turn the layer black and white, and then smooth out the edges. So I'm going to call my script smooth threshold. After the name of your script, then we need to include whatever parameters we want to require for this particular script, and with most scripts, we need to have an image and a layer to work with. A user could have several images open at one time. We need to know which one of those is being used to run the script on, and we need to know which layer should the effect be applied to. So in this case, we're just going to put image and layer. So this tells us we're making a function called script.foo smooth threshold, and it will require an image and a layer to work with. Now I'm going to go ahead and just put some spaces here and close off the parentheses for my define function up here. And now whatever commands we type between these two parentheses, those will be the commands that are performed whenever we call the script. So to make this spaced out a little more nicely, I'm going to put two spaces right here just to kind of indent over the body of our script inside the define block. So the first step, remember the idea was to go to colors, threshold, and we have these two values here to choose from. Usually we left this one the same, and we could change this depending on how big or small we wanted the brush to be. So what we need to do is figure out how do we call the threshold tool inside of script. So again, we're going to go back to help procedure browser, which we looked at in the first video. And remember, this shows us a list of all the functions that are built into GIMP. So if I type in threshold right here, then we can see there's an option here called GIMP threshold, and it has three parameters that we need to pass to it. One is a drawable. A drawable is just basically another name for a layer. It doesn't have to be a layer, though. It could be a layer mask or a channel. It could be any object, basically, which you are able to draw on. For our purposes, though, it will just be a layer. And then we have the low and high threshold values, which we had right here. So this procedure browser tells us how to use this command. It tells us that the name is just GIMP threshold, so we open our parentheses for this new function. We type the name, GIMP threshold, exactly as it appears over here. And then we need to include three parameters for this function, so we need to know what drawable to apply the threshold to. Well, we're just going to apply it to whatever layer was plugged into our function. So we're just going to put the name of our layer variable there. And then we need to know which low and high threshold values to use. So for now, we'll just use the default values of 127 and 255. And there we go. That's the end of our threshold command. So when our script runs, it will apply the threshold tool to our image just as if we had done this manually. So the next step, remember, was to apply the blur filter, and that was the Gaussian blur filter. So if we go back to our procedure browser, we could search for Gauss right here, and we see we have a plugin Gauss which runs the Gaussian blur filter. So this tells us the format to type this in. We're just going to do plug in Gauss, and we have to include all these parameters, so a few more this time. First of all, we need to know which run mode to use. We have two choices, either run interactive or run non-interactive. When your script runs, if you chose the interactive mode, it would cause the Gaussian blur pop-up window to appear while your script is running. But we don't want that to pop up and interrupt our script. We just want to tell it what values to use and run it automatically. So we want to use non-interactive mode. So we can just copy this word here, non-interactive, or you could just type the number 1. But if you include the word non-interactive, it makes your script a little easier to read because you can tell what it's actually doing rather than just seeing some number there, which is kind of arbitrary. We need to know what layer to apply this to, so we're going to use what image to apply this to, so we're going to use whatever image was passed to our function. And then we need to know what drawable to apply this to, so we're going to apply it to whatever layer was passed to our function. Then we have a choice of a horizontal and vertical radii, and also a method down here. So if we go back to our Gaussian blur filter to see what that looked like, those were our two radii here, which we're just going to use 3. And the blur method by default was this RLE method. I'm not really sure if it matters that much, but we'll just use the RLE method. So we can go back to our script, look at our procedure browser. So the next one was the horizontal and vertical radii, so those were both 3. And the blur method was RLE. So I'll just type number 1. So the next step was to run the levels tool. So we could go back to our procedure browser to figure out how to type that in and type levels here. So we have this function called GIMP levels, and it has lots of parameters. So we can go ahead and start typing that in. We're going to use the GIMP levels function, so type the name just as it appeared in the procedure browser. And then we need to include all the parameters that apply to this function. So first of all, what layer or drawable should we work on? Well, we're going to work on whatever layer was passed to our function. The channel, again, we have all these choices. So what do these mean? The channel is here. We're just going to remember we used the default value of value, so we'll leave it at that. And then we have these these low and high input levels. We have this gamma value in the middle, and then we have these low and high output values. So the output values we left at 0, 255, gamma we left at 1, but the input levels we moved these up to, I think, about 95 usually works, and 160 usually works for this. Yeah, as you can see, that gave us our nice smooth edges over here. So we want to enter all these values into our levels tool. So the channel we wanted to do was value, so I could just copy this text, histogram value right here. Add that as my second parameter. Then we needed the low input value, which was 95. Then the high input value was 160. The gamma value, we left it the default of 1. The low output and high output were the default values, 0 and 255. And that was our last parameter, so we go ahead and close off that function. And now these give us all three of the commands that we need to apply. And this is basically it for the script, but there's one last piece of information that we want to include to make the script work properly. And that is we should include a line at the bottom which is GIMP displays flush. So this is a command which you can see what it does by typing flush over here. All it does is it basically tells GIMP that we're done changing the image and we want to update the image as it appears in the window over here. And this is it for our script. It's a pretty simple script actually. But the last thing, we can't actually run the script yet. We have to tell GIMP how to interact with our script file. So we need to include an extra command to register our script with the GIMP procedure browser. Okay, to save some time, I've gone ahead and typed out the code to register our script with GIMP. And instead of typing it all out for you in the video, I'll just go through now and explain what each piece means. The purpose of this is, as I said, to register our script with GIMP. In order for GIMP to use our script, it has to know a little bit of information about our script and how does our script work. Basically, we have to tell GIMP how to use the script. So, we use this function called script foo register. And we have this whole big list of parameters that we need to pass to it. So this is just a normal function call like we used up here, where we would have a name of a function, then a list of some parameters that we need to include. But in this case, because there's so many parameters and it takes up a lot of space, rather than typing it all in one line, we usually skip them down each on a separate line so it looks a little bit nicer. So the first parameter that we need to enter into this function is we have to tell GIMP what the name of our script is. So this is just exactly the same name that we included up here. Script foo smooth threshold. We take that same exact name and put it down here in quotation marks. This tells GIMP when we try to run the script, it knows that, okay, I should jump up here and call this function first. Now that might seem kind of pointless if you only have one function in your script, but you could have a script with multiple functions in it, and in that case GIMP needs to know which one is the starting point for your script. So we include that down here in our script foo registers to tell GIMP which function to call to run the script. The second parameter in our list here, it tells GIMP where to put our script in the menus. So this says we're just going to go into our image menu, which is all these menus up here at the top of the image. And we want this to appear, in this case I chose to put it in the colors menu because that's where the regular threshold tool appears, in the colors menu. So I put my smooth threshold in the colors menu as well, and I just want its name to appear just like this as smooth threshold. The third parameter is just a simple description of what your script does so that when people try to use it, they know what it's supposed to do. This will appear when you hover your mouse cursor over that item in the menu. It'll pop up a little box that will say, okay, this applies to threshold with smooth edges. So hopefully the user knows approximately what that is supposed to do before they run it. Next, we just include the name of the author. So I've just put my username here. This tells people who wrote the scripts, they know where it came from. And after that, we put some copyright information. So you can just put your name again or whatever else you want to include for the copyright information. Next is the date the script was written. You could put the day as well. It doesn't matter what format you type it in. And then after that, we include which image modes are we able to apply the script to. So there are three choices. They are RGB, grayscale, and indexed. RGB is the most common type of image. This means that our image could have basically any colors that we want, any values of red, green, and blue. A grayscale image means it's only black and white and gray values. And then the third type would be an indexed image, which has a limited palette of usually like 256 colors. Those are like what you would use for a GIF image, like a GIF animation. It has a limited amount of colors that it can display. So the only thing that really need to worry about for this video tutorial is that because we're using the Gaussian blur filter, this filter will not work if we try to run it on an indexed image. So we can only do it on RGB and grayscale images, so we include those, and the asterisks just mean that they could either be regular RGB images or RGB images with alpha channels. Same thing goes for the grayscale images. So after all this preliminary data, just kind of describing our script and what we can do with it, we have to tell GIMP what values do we need to input to the script. So up here we said that we needed two parameters, an image and a layer to work with. So these parts of the register tell GIMP that we need to figure out what the active image is and what the active drawable, or this could be a layer or a channel or a layer mask, things like that, as I said. We need GIMP to tell us what the active image and drawable are. So these two commands, so SF just stands for script foo, these two commands tell GIMP that when we run the script, GIMP should figure out what the active image and active layers are, and they should plug those into our image and layer variables up here. So we put those here. The things in quotation marks after that are just like little basically labels describing these two parameters. The zeros over here usually would represent the default values for your parameters. In this case, the default value for an image or a layer doesn't really matter because it's going to be changed to whatever the active layer and image are. So we just put zeros there kind of as placeholders. So now that we've registered our script with GIMP, we can go ahead and save it and actually load it into GIMP and see that it works. So to do that, we should go to File, Save As. And you'll need to navigate to your scripts folder. So usually this is done by going to like your username folder or whatever your home directory is for your user account that you're logged into as. And then you usually have a folder for GIMP 2.8 or whatever version of GIMP you're currently working on. And then there should be a scripts folder inside of that. So go to that folder. And the important thing if you're using Notepad or Microsoft Word, kind of annoying thing, is that it automatically tries to save everything as a .txt file. So in order to save it as something else, we have to change this drop-down menu to all files instead. And we want to save this as a .scm file, which stands for scheme, because remember these script foo scripts are written in the scheme programming language. And we can give this whatever name you want. So because this is going to be a part of our ultimate script, which will create splatter brushes, I'm going to call this script splatter, even though it doesn't actually make splatter brushes at this point. And you can just go ahead and click save. To use the script, we'll go back to GIMP, and we need to refresh our scripts by going to Filters, Script Foo, Refresh Scripts. And now if I click on Colors, because we chose to put in the Colors menu, we scroll down here, and this is our script that we just made. You can see if you hover over it, it shows that little description of our script. If I click to run the script, it will apply that to our image just like that. It does all three of those steps automatically. The threshold tool, the blurring, and the levels tool. So that's basically it for this script, but there's two extra little things that we can add to our script to make it a little bit better. So the first thing you'll notice is that if you go to undo the action of this script, if you press Ctrl Z, it will only do one step at a time. It will undo the levels, then it will undo the blurring, and then it will undo the threshold. Now, the fact that we've made a script which does all three of them at once automatically, it would be nice to combine them all together as a single undo item. So we want to change the undo grouping so that when we click Ctrl Z, it undoes the whole script all at once. Somebody might write a script that has 15 commands in it, and if a user realizes, oh wait, I didn't actually want to run that script, they don't want to have to press Ctrl Z 15 times to undo the script. They just want to press Ctrl Z once to undo all those commands at once. So we're going to change our script to combine all those commands into one undo group. So to do that, we can come back to our script, and we just need to add a new command at the beginning, at the end, tell GIMP to group these all together as one undo group. So let's go back to our procedure browser and see how we should type this in. If we search for undo group, we can see we have these two commands, undo group end and undo group start. Now all we have to do with these is type them and tell what image to work on, and then everything between those two commands will be grouped together as a single item when we try to undo it. So if we come back to our script, at the beginning we're just going to add a new line and type GIMP image undo group start, and we have to tell it what image to work on. So we're just going to work on whatever image was plugged into our function. And then at the end, after we're done doing all of our processes, you could put this before or after the display is flushed. I don't think it should really matter, but I'll just put it right after our three commands. We can say GIMP image undo group end, and that will end off the undo group for that image. So now if we save this by just pressing Ctrl S, come back to GIMP and refresh our scripts one more time. And now if we run this colors smooth threshold, if we press Ctrl Z now, it reverts all of that completely back to what it looked like before we ran the script. So it undoes all three of the steps at once, unlike it was previously. So now the last thing we'd like to do is to give the user more control over how our script works. For example, the first step, remember, is to do the colors threshold, and we'd like to be able to choose what value goes here when we run the script so that we can determine whether we get these bigger or smaller splatters. Right now we have this value of 127 hard-coded into our script right here. We'd like to put a variable there instead so that the user gets to pick when they run the script which value is used to determine how big and small the splatters are. So what we can actually do is add another parameter to the definition of our function, another piece of information that gets inputted to the function when we call it. So I could just call this the threshold value, so just maybe threshold for the name of that variable. And then whatever that variable is, we could just tell it to plug that variable in right here instead of always using 127. Now whatever number gets plugged in here is a number that will be used when the script runs to determine the cutoff value for that threshold to determine how big or small the splatters are. So in order to make this actually work though, just as we needed to register our image and layer parameters down here in the script foo register command, we need to do the same thing with the threshold parameter. And to save time, I'm just going to paste in what this should look like, and then I'll explain what each part does. So you might also want to kind of space these out just to make things line up. It looks a little bit more nice if you do that, although it's not really necessary. Basically what this is going to do is when we run the script, it's going to give a little window that pops up, as you've probably seen when you run many other scripts. A little window is going to pop up and it's going to have some little slider controls, some little widgets for us to play with. In this case, it's only going to be one of them, one little widget to let us pick the threshold value to use. So this just tells us that we want one of those little adjustment widgets to pop up when we run our script. This tells us the name of that parameter that we're using, and then this is information about how that slider control is going to look. So rather than try to just explain it right here, let's go ahead and actually save the script, refresh it, and see what happens when we run it, and I'll explain it when it pops up. Control S to save this, and then go to Filters, Script Foo, Refresh Scripts. If I go to Colors, Smooth Threshold, you'll see, as I was just trying to describe, one of these little windows will pop up and give us a value that we can play around with here before the script runs. So as I said, this word here is just a little label that describes this item that we get to adjust. And then this information is telling us that the default value should be 127. The smallest and largest possible values are 0 and 255. The 1 tells us that we just go by increments of 1 unit here. And the 10 means that if we click over here like this, then it'll jump up by multiples of 10 instead to go a little more quickly. The 0 says that we don't want to include any decimal places because we just want to use integers. And the SF slider tells us that we get this little slider control rather than just having this little numerical value box here by itself. So once we've included all of those in a list data structure like we talked about in the previous video, right? These are all enclosed in parentheses with a little single quotation mark out front. So this is a list of values, and those control how the widget looks. And so what this says when we run the script is whatever number we pick for this, that value will be plugged into our threshold variable up here, and then that threshold variable is plugged into this GIMP threshold function call, so that when our script runs, it will automatically use whatever value we picked to determine that threshold rather than automatically using the default value of 127 every time. If I go ahead and click OK with this larger value here, you'll see that we get these fatter looking splatters rather than the skinnier splatters that we had previously when we automatically reverted to the default value. So that's basically it for this video. We've gone ahead and written this script which performs all three of these actions right here. It combines them all together in one undo group, takes the display of the image after performing those operations, and registers our script with GIMP, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. I think this one should have been a little bit more interesting than the previous video because we actually got to write a script today. So that's always good to write your first script. This really is the sort of thing where you kind of have to just jump in and dive right in and start doing some scripting before you can really get a hang of it. So I encourage you all to try it out on your own right away and try to follow along, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'll put a link to the script file down below as well, I think, so you can just look at the script there if you need to see it more carefully. I hope you stick around for the next part of the video, where in the third part we will actually be writing the script which generates a brand new image and creates a random splatter on it. So in this video the script doesn't make a new image, rather it works on an existing image. So we had to, for this script, we had to have an image open already, and then we could apply the effect of the script to it. In the next video we'll be making a script that generates a brand new image and fills it with a random splatter brush. So I hope you'll stick around for that, and thanks for watching.